Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we step into the powerful and often overlooked story of the Washington quarter dollar, a coin that feels ordinary only because it has been part of American life for so long, yet behind its familiar face lies a journey shaped by history, hardship, ambition, and national identity, because this coin was born during one of the most fragile periods in United States history, when the Great Depression had shaken confidence, emptied wallets, and tested the spirit of the nation. And at that moment the choice to honor George Washington was not accidental but deeply symbolic, representing leadership, resilience, and moral authority at a time when Americans needed reassurance more than ornamentation, and unlike earlier coins that relied on abstract representations of liberty and ideals, the Washington quarter placed a real human face into circulation, signaling a new era in American coinage where historical memory became part of daily commerce, and the design itself was rooted in classical inspiration, drawing from the famous bust by Jean-Antoine Houdon, which was widely considered the most accurate representation of Washington, capturing him not as a mythic hero but as a thoughtful, composed statesman, and this realism gave the coin an emotional gravity that resonated instantly with the public, helping explain why a coin originally intended as a one-year commemorative quietly transitioned into a permanent fixture of U.S. currency, and as the years passed, the Washington quarter became more than a medium of exchange. It became a silent witness to American life, moving through countless hands during wartime rationing, post-war prosperity, cultural revolutions, and technological change, and while its design appeared unchanged to the casual observer, the reality beneath the surface was far more complex. Because the U.S. Mint was constantly adapting production methods to meet demand, often prioritizing speed over perfection, leading to variations in strike strength, surface quality, and detail sharpness that now form the foundation of serious collecting, and these subtle differences reveal the pressures of each era, from worn dies that softened Washington's hair and the eagle's feathers, to rushed wartime strikes that sacrificed clarity for quantity, and for collectors, these imperfections are not flaws but fingerprints of history, telling stories that pristine modern coins often cannot, and the Washington quarter's silver composition further deepened its significance, linking it directly to global metal markets and economic forces, a connection that would later reshape its destiny when rising silver prices caused widespread hoarding and melting, permanently reducing the population of earlier issues and turning once common coins into increasingly scarce survivors. And this transformation highlights one of the most important truths in numismatics, that rarity is not always created at the moment of minting but often emerges decades later through loss, destruction, and selective preservation, and the Washington quarter embodies this truth perfectly, because despite enormous original mintages, high-grade examples remain elusive due to heavy circulation, bag storage damage, and the simple fact that few people thought to protect what seemed ordinary at the time. And yet it is precisely this ordinariness that gives the Washington quarter its power, because it reminds us that history is not only preserved in museums and archives but carried quietly in everyday objects, waiting for someone to look closer and recognize the story they hold. And as the Washington quarter settled into everyday use, its presence became so constant that it quietly shaped how Americans understood money itself, because unlike flashy commemoratives or short-lived experimental designs, this coin endured year after year, becoming a trusted companion through eras of transformation, surviving policy shifts, wars, economic cycles, and cultural revolutions without ever losing its core identity. And this endurance was not accidental but the result of careful balance between symbolism and practicality, where the design was dignified enough to command respect yet simple enough to withstand the brutal realities of mass circulation, and every subtle line on Washington's face, every contour of his hair, every fold of his coat reflected both artistic intention and mechanical necessity, as dies were pushed to their limits to meet national demand, producing coins that varied in sharpness and texture depending on when and where they were struck, and these variations are what turn an ordinary-looking quarter into a storyteller for those who know how to read it, because a softly struck example might whisper of worn dies and rushed production, while a sharply defined piece speaks of fresh tools and careful pressure. And when collectors compare quarters from Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, they are not just comparing mint marks but uncovering regional differences in production philosophy, equipment condition, and operational stress, and over time these differences accumulated into a rich tapestry of nuance that rewards deep study, transforming the Washington quarter into a series where patience and observation matter more than quick assumptions, and as decades passed, the coin's silver composition anchored it firmly to global economics, meaning its fate was tied not only to national policy but to international markets, a reality that became dramatically clear when rising silver prices turned everyday change into hidden treasure, prompting widespread hoarding and melting that permanently altered the population landscape of the series, and this silent disappearance of millions of coins created a paradox where abundance gave way to scarcity, especially in higher grades, because while millions were struck, very few survived untouched by circulation, storage, and handling, making true mint-state example survivors against overwhelming odds. And this reality reshaped how collectors viewed the Washington Quarter, no longer as mere pocket change but as a historical document stamped in metal, carrying evidence of industrial capability, economic pressure, and public behavior. And as new generations encounter the coin, often without realizing its layered past, the Washington Quarter continued to serve its role quietly, bridging past and present, reminding us that history does not always announce itself loudly but often moves forward in small, durable forms that pass unnoticed through our hands until one day we stop, look closer, and realize how much has been carried within something so seemingly simple. As the Washington Quarter continued its life beyond its commemorative origins, it slowly transformed from a symbolic tribute into a silent witness of American endurance, because once the public accepted George Washington's portrait as a permanent feature of circulating coinage, the quarter became more than money. It became a companion to daily life, traveling through decades of change without ceremony or announcement, passing through the hands of factory workers, soldiers, farmers, shopkeepers, and children alike, each exchange adding invisible layers of history to its surface. And during the late 1930s and into the 1940s, production numbers increased dramatically as economic activity expanded and the nation prepared for global conflict, placing enormous pressure on the U.S. Mint to strike millions of coins rapidly, often sacrificing strike sharpness for speed, which explains why so many Washington quarters from this era show flat hair detail, weak eagle feathers, and uneven rims. Characteristics that today help collectors identify not only the year but the conditions under which each coin was produced. And as World War II reshaped global priorities, the Washington Quarter remained composed of silver, a metal vital to both industry and morale, reinforcing the coin's dual role as both currency and reserve value. And while paper money fluctuated in trust and purchasing power, the silver quarter carried a reassuring weight, literally and psychologically, reminding citizens that tangible value still existed in their pockets. And after the war, as America entered a period of rapid growth and consumer expansion, the quarter became a key instrument of everyday convenience, fueling vending machines, parking meters, laundromats, and transportation systems, embedding itself into the rhythms of modern life while still carrying the dignified image of the nation's first president. And this blend of utility and symbolism is what makes the Washington Quarter uniquely powerful, because it managed to remain relevant without ever reinventing itself, relying instead on consistency and quiet authority. Yet beneath this surface stability, subtle changes were always occurring, from minor adjustments in hub design to evolving minting techniques, all of which created varieties that today form the backbone of serious collecting, where small differences in relief, spacing, and luster can separate an ordinary coin from one that commands significant attention. And as the 1950s and early 1960s approached, the growing gap between face value and silver content began to create tension, as people started setting aside silver coins, sensing their future worth even before official policy changed. And this quiet hoarding marked the beginning of a major transformation for the Washington Quarter, one that would forever divide the series into eras defined not just by date but by material, survival, and perception. And through all of this, the quarter never lost its identity, because Washington's image remained steady, calm, and unchanging, acting as a visual anchor in a rapidly shifting world. And it is this unbroken continuity, stretching across generations, that elevates the Washington Quarter beyond statistics and mintages, turning it into a historical thread that connects personal memory with national narrative, making every surviving coin not just an object, but a fragment of lived experience. As the Washington Quarter moved deeper into circulation beyond its early years, it began to reflect not only the ideals of the nation but also the practical realities of mass production, economic pressure, and historical change. Because while the portrait of George Washington remained steady and composed on the obverse, the world around the coin was constantly shifting. And these shifts left subtle yet important fingerprints on the quarters produced across different decades and mints, revealing a story that goes far beyond simple design elements, as the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints each developed distinct characteristics based on equipment, workforce experience, and production priorities, resulting in coins that may appear identical to the casual observer but reveal meaningful differences to trained collectors, such as variations in strike sharpness, luster quality, and die wear, particularly noticeable in Washington's hair curls, the clarity of the lettering, and the definition of the eagle's feathers on the reverse. And these details are not merely aesthetic, they are historical evidence of how the U.S. Mint adapted to changing demands, especially during times of crisis like World War II, when speed and quantity became more important than artistic precision. leading to softer strikes and less refined details. Yet even under those conditions, the Washington quarter remained reliable and instantly recognizable, serving its role as a backbone of everyday commerce, moving through military bases, factories, farms, and city streets, silently participating in the daily rhythm of American life. And this widespread circulation is precisely why truly high-grade examples from earlier years are so rare today, because most quarters were never meant to be saved, they were meant to be spent, stacked, counted, and moved as efficiently as possible. Often stored in large canvas bags where coins banged against one another, collecting marks before ever reaching circulation, and this reality makes condition a critical factor in value, since two quarters from the same year and mint can differ dramatically in worth based solely on how well they survived the journey from mint to present day, and as collectors began to recognize this, the Washington quarter evolved from a utilitarian object into a serious field of study, where patience, experience, and careful observation became essential tools, and the coin's long silver era added another layer of complexity, tying its fate to global silver markets and economic policy, especially as inflation and rising metal prices in the mid-20th century caused the public to hoard silver coins, unknowingly reducing future supply and reshaping the landscape of collectible quarters forever. And this period marks a turning point where the Washington quarter transitioned from being taken for granted to being consciously preserved, setting the stage for its modern reputation as both a historical artifact and a collector's staple, bridging the gap between common currency and treasured numismatic piece, and reinforcing the idea that value is not always created at the moment of minting, but often emerges decades later through survival, demand, and the stories coins carry forward through time. The Washington quarter's journey through the mid-20th century reveals a deeper layer of meaning when examined through the lens of production realities, collector behavior, and the silent forces that shaped which coins survived and which disappeared forever, because while mintages often reached into the tens or even hundreds of millions, the conditions under which these coins were produced meant that true quality was rarely the priority. As presses ran at relentless speed, dies were pushed far beyond ideal usage, and coins were dumped into bags where they clashed against one another, acquiring marks and abrasions before ever reaching circulation, and this industrial reality explains why high-grade examples remain elusive even for years considered common, turning condition into the defining factor of desirability, where a single step up in preservation can mean the difference between an ordinary collectible and a coin that commands serious attention. And as the decades progressed, subtle shifts in design detail became apparent to trained eyes, including variations in Washington's hair definition, the sharpness of the eagle's breast feathers, and the clarity of lettering, all influenced by die preparation techniques, hub changes, and mint-specific practices, making the Washington quarter a rich study in comparative numismatics, where learning to see becomes just as important as learning to collect. And during this era, the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints each developed distinct reputations, with certain facilities known for weaker strikes and others praised for superior detail, though even within the same year results could vary dramatically depending on die state and production timing, and collectors who dig deeper soon realize that rarity is often hidden not in the date itself but in the combination of mint, strike quality, and surface preservation, a realization that transforms the Washington quarter from a simple album filler into a nuanced historical record of American manufacturing. And as silver prices rose steadily in the post-war years, another invisible force reshaped the series, as millions of quarters were pulled from circulation, hoarded, and eventually melted, not because they were rare or beautiful, but because their metal content suddenly outweighed their face value, and this mass disappearance permanently altered the population landscape, leaving behind a survival bias where only a fraction of originally minted coins remain today, and this is why certain dates that once flooded commerce now appear surprisingly scarce in high grade, creating a paradox where abundance on paper contrasts sharply with real-world availability. And through all of this, the Washington quarter continued to circulate as a trusted instrument of trade, bridging generations and economic cycles, quietly accumulating history in every worn rim and softened detail, reminding collectors that value is never static but constantly shaped by time, human behavior, and the unpredictable currents of history. The Washington quarter reaches its most compelling depth when attention turns toward the subtle rarities, transitional moments, and silent survivors that elevate this series beyond its everyday reputation, because while millions of quarters were struck year after year, only a fraction emerged with the characteristics collectors now seek, and this is where history, chance, and human behavior intersect in fascinating ways. As certain early dates produced during the 1930s faced inconsistent die preparation, uneven pressure, and hurried production that resulted in weak strikes, particularly on Washington's hair above the ear and the eagle's breast feathers, making sharply struck examples exceptionally difficult to locate today, and these coins were never set aside with intention. they circulated heavily during an era when saving spare change was a luxury few could afford, meaning that high-grade survivors exist not because they were planned, but because they escaped circulation by accident, tucked away in drawers, jars, or forgotten envelopes, and as decades passed, the silver composition of the Washington quarter became both its strength and its curse, because rising bullion prices in the mid-20th century led to mass melting that erased countless coins from existence, permanently reshaping rarity across the series and creating scarcity where abundance once existed. And this silent destruction is what makes many dates far rarer today than mintage numbers suggest. Especially coins with full detail, original luster, and untouched surfaces, and beyond condition rarity, the series also reveals intrigue through mint-mark distribution, where certain branch mints struggled with quality control or limited output during specific years, leaving behind coins that collectors now pursue relentlessly, not because they were famous at the time, but because time revealed their importance. And the Washington quarter also experienced artistic transitions that quietly altered its appearance, from changes in hub design to subtle relief adjustments that influenced how light plays across the surface, giving trained eyes clues about era, mint, and production context. And as the series progressed into the clad era, the emotional shift was equally significant, as silver disappeared from circulating quarters, marking the end of a chapter and creating a psychological divide between what collectors perceive as historic and modern, yet even clad issues carry importance through errors, proof variations, and special strikes that demonstrate how even modern coins can develop numismatic relevance when anomalies occur, and this layered complexity is what keeps the Washington quarter eternally engaging, because it refuses to be simplified, teaching collectors that value is not always obvious, rarity is not always intentional, and history often hides in plain sight, waiting for those willing to study deeply, observe patiently, and appreciate the quiet stories told through metal, wear, and survival. As the story of the Washington quarter dollar reaches its final stretch, its true importance becomes even clearer, because this coin is not just a product of the United States Mint, but a living record of American endurance, memory, and continuity, a coin that survived economic collapse, global war, industrial transformation, and cultural change while remaining visually familiar to generation after generation, and this familiarity is precisely what makes it powerful, because it proves that historical significance does not always arrive wrapped in rarity or spectacle, but sometimes lives quietly in everyday objects that move unnoticed through countless lives, and the Washington quarter did exactly that, bridging eras without demanding attention, its image of George Washington standing firm as the nation evolved around it, watching highways replace dirt roads, radio give way to television, and physical money slowly yield to digital transactions. Yet even as modern commemorative designs and state series came and went, the classic Washington quarter retained a gravity that collectors and historians alike continue to respect, because its long silver era alone connects it to a time when coinage possessed intrinsic value, when the weight of a quarter mattered not just symbolically but materially, and the end of that silver composition marked a philosophical shift in American currency, transforming the Washington quarter into a symbol of transition between tangible wealth and representational money, and this transition only deepened collector interest, as older silver issues disappeared into melting pots while survivors became silent witnesses to a vanished monetary system, and today when collectors examine mint state examples, they are not just chasing luster or sharp strikes, they are chasing moments frozen in time, moments when dies were fresh, presses were aligned, and a single coin emerged untouched by circulation, representing the closest connection possible to the moment of its creation, and yet even heavily worn examples command respect, because their smooth surfaces tell stories no pristine coin ever could, stories of pockets, purchases, journeys, and hands long gone, and this duality is what makes the Washington quarter endlessly fascinating, because it offers meaning at every level, from beginner collectors discovering history through common dates to advanced numismatists studying strike characteristics and survival rates, and even beyond collecting, the coin stands as a cultural artifact that reflects how a nation chooses to remember its founders, not through grand monuments alone, but through objects designed to circulate among the people, reinforcing shared identity through everyday interaction, and in that sense the Washington quarter is not just a coin but a conversation between past and present. A reminder that history does not live only in museums but in the ordinary things we overlook, and as long as these quarters are studied, collected, and passed down, their story will continue to evolve, carrying forward the legacy of George Washington and the nation he helped shape, quietly enduring just as it always has. Thanks for watching.